Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're jumping into a really sharp new way of thinking about financial stability. We're going to explore why the old methods for testing against a crisis just don't cut it anymore, and what a much smarter, more realistic approach actually looks like.
So, let's start with an idea most of us take for granted, that financial stress tests are supposed to be a kind of crystal ball, right? That their job is to predict the next big economic earthquake. For years, that's been the driving question. But what if that's the wrong question entirely? You see, the whole problem with prediction is that modern finance isn't a simple machine. It's a complex, living, adaptive ecosystem. A better analogy is a rainforest, not a car engine. You've got all these interdependent layers and different actors all interacting in ways that are constantly evolving.
And because it's an ecosystem, simple cause and effect just goes out the window. You get things like nonlinearity, where a tiny little tremor can set off a massive landslide, but a huge shock might just get absorbed with no problem. People's behavior adapts and changes. New risks just emerge out of nowhere from all the interactions. And financial innovation is always a step ahead of the rulebook. All of this makes trying to forecast the future pretty much impossible.
Which means if we're serious about building a resilient system, we have to change our entire focus. We need to stop chasing the illusion of prediction and start embracing the hard work of exploration.
So what's the better question to ask? Well, instead of asking what is going to happen, we should be asking how does the system behave when it's put under serious pressure? Where are the hidden weak spots? How does stress travel from one point to another? At what point does it actually break? This is a fundamental shift in how we think about stability.
And this new approach puts stress testing right where it should be, at the end of a much bigger process called the stewardship arc. Look, you can't test a system you don't really understand. So first, you have to map out its design, get a handle on its governance, and then diagnose where its vulnerabilities are. Only then does it make sense to start exploring how it behaves under strain.
Okay, let's really dig into this new way of thinking, starting with a huge difference in how we actually apply pressure to the system we're testing.
So the old way was all about scenarios. You know the drill. These are detailed, plausible stories about what could go wrong. Think a housing market crash, a big sovereign debt crisis, that kind of thing. And the whole debate gets stuck on, well, how likely is this story really? But this new approach uses what it calls stress dimensions. So for a minute, forget the story. Instead, we focus on the raw, fundamental pressures themselves. Forces like severe funding liquidity strain or an abrupt loss of confidence. These are the things that actually break the system, no matter what story kicks them off.
And this is the absolute key. We shift from arguing about how believable a story is to focusing on how the system's actual plumbing and wiring responds to these basic strains. We stop asking, is this likely to happen? And we start asking, what specific vulnerability are we trying to test right now?
All right, let's move on, because this next idea builds directly on that. We're going to look at what really determines how bad a crisis gets. And here's a hint. It's almost never the initial event.
We tend to get completely obsessed with the shock itself. You know, the size of the initial explosion, the Richter scale of the earthquake. We spend endless hours debating where it came from and how big it was, as if it's the main character in the whole drama.
But the thing that truly decides the outcome is the propagation. It's not the earthquake that matters most. It's how the seismic waves travel through the city. Propagation is how a problem in one little corner of the market can cascade across the entire globe and turn into a full-blown systemic meltdown.
And this is where it all clicks. The shock? It's just a tool to get the test going. The propagation, the system's response, that's what we're actually studying. This explains everything. It's why a seemingly tiny shock can sometimes set off a massive crisis, while the huge one just gets absorbed without anyone noticing. It all comes down to the underlying structure.
Now, this new way of stress testing goes one step further, into what you might call the final frontier. It doesn't just test balance sheets and market plumbing. It tests the human systems, the people and institutions responsible for managing the crisis.
Now, this quote here is fascinating. It gets at a really profound truth. Major crises often happen even when every single person and every institution is following their own rules to the letter. The problem isn't rule-breaking. The problem is a failure of the system to coordinate and act as a whole.
So, a huge part of this is exploring what we call governance capacity. When the pressure is on, can different agencies with different jobs actually coordinate? Can they look at the same fragmented information and come to a shared conclusion and then act in time? Or do their mismatched priorities and communication gaps just let the crisis spiral out of control?
And this table really lays it out. See, governance failure is a systemic risk all by itself. It's what happens when these crucial functions break down, when coordination falls apart, when information gets misinterpreted, when decisions get delayed. That's when fragility quietly builds up in the cracks of the system, totally invisible until it's way too late.
So what's the bottom line here? After all of this, what does this new way of thinking about stress testing really give us?
Well, it helps us move away from the dangerous illusion that we can predict the future and toward genuine, real preparedness. This isn't about getting a pass/fail grade or a reassuring number at the end. It's about deeply understanding the hidden connections in our financial ecosystem and, crucially, testing our human ability to manage it when things go wrong. It's about informing our judgment, not replacing it.
Which leaves us with one last big thought. A crisis has a funny way of showing you exactly how a system is really wired. And this new approach basically asks a simple question. Shouldn't we explore that wiring before the system breaks apart? At the end of the day, this isn't about predicting the future. It's about understanding the present so deeply that we're ready for any future that comes our way.